In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where empires rise and fall like cosmic dust, there exists a truth that even the most advanced civilizations struggle to comprehend. Love recognizes no boundaries of species, culture, or star systems. When Princess Zarathel of the mighty Velthari Empire first laid her luminescent violet eyes upon Captain Marcus Chun of Earth's Colonial Defense Force, the universe itself seemed to pause. Here was a human, a species her people had dismissed as primitive barbarians, who carried himself with such quiet dignity and unshakable resolve that it defied every assumption her empire had made about his kind. This is not just a story of forbidden love across the stars. It's a testament to the extraordinary capacity of humans to inspire change in the most unlikely places, to find honor in the darkest moments, and to prove that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won with weapons, but with the courage to see beyond the hatred that divides us. In a galaxy where humans are considered the underdogs, one soldier's unwavering humanity will challenge an entire empire's understanding of what it means to be truly civilized. What happens when the heart of an alien princess becomes the battleground for the soul of her people? What happens when a human soldier must choose between his mission and a love that could either doom his species or save them all? The answer lies in the grand halls of the Velthari capital, where destiny was the face of an enemy, and where the greatest weapon humanity possesses isn't technology or firepower. It's the indomitable spirit that refuses to surrender, even in the face of impossible odds. The gleaming spires of Velthara Prime stretched endlessly into the crimson sky, their crystalline surfaces reflecting the twin suns that bathed the capital world in perpetual twilight. Captain Marcus Chun had seen many alien cities during his 5 years with the Colonial Defense Force, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer magnificence of the Velthari homeworld. Every building seemed to pulse with an inner light, and the very air hummed with an energy that made his skin tingle. Marcus walked in formation with his diplomatic escort, his polished dress uniform a stark contrast to the flowing, luminescent robes of his Velthari guides. The weight of humanity's future pressed down on his shoulders like lead armor. 3 months ago, the Velthari Empire had issued an ultimatum to the Terran Federation: surrender all Outer Rim colonies or face complete annihilation. Humanity's response had been swift, not with weapons, but with an unprecedented diplomatic mission. Your people are either very brave or very foolish, human, said Commander Thalaner, the tall, silver-skinned alien who led the escort. His voice carried the musical quality typical of his species, but Marcus could detect the underlying disdain. To send a soldier to negotiate with the Empire shows remarkable arrogance. Marcus kept his expression neutral. Sometimes the best diplomats are those who understand the true cost of war, Commander. Thalaner's violet eyes studied Marcus for a long moment before he turned away. The Velthari were an ancient species, their empires spanning 1,000 worlds. To them, humanity was nothing more than an upstart species that had stumbled into space barely 2 centuries ago. The fact that humans had managed to claim and hold dozens of worlds in the Outer Rim was viewed as an affront to the natural order of the galaxy. As they approached the Grand Palace, Marcus felt his breath catch despite his military training. The structure defied conventional architecture, seeming to grow from the planet's surface like a living crystal formation. Spires twisted and curved in impossible directions, connected by bridges that appeared to be made of solid light. At the base of the palace, massive gates carved from what looked like compressed starlight stood open, revealing a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. The Eternal Hall, Thalaner explained without being asked, built over 10,000 years ago by our ancestors. Every Velthari citizen makes a pilgrimage here at least once in their lifetime. You should feel honored, human. No member of your species has ever set foot within these walls. Marcus nodded respectfully. He had studied Velthari culture extensively during the 3-month journey from Earth, but seeing it firsthand was overwhelming. The walls of the corridor were lined with what appeared to be living murals, scenes of great battles, scientific discoveries, and artistic achievements that moved and shifted as if viewed through flowing water. The Velthari had been traveling among the stars when humanity was still learning to make fire. As they walked deeper into the palace, Marcus became aware of other figures moving through the corridors. Velthari nobles, their skin patterns marking their family lineages and social status, paused to stare at the human diplomat. Some showed obvious curiosity, others barely concealed hostility. Marcus maintained his composure, remembering his training. He was not just representing himself, but the entire human race. The grand hall opened before them like a cathedral of light. The ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into a soft, golden glow, and the walls were lined with what appeared to be actual stars, held in place by some form of technology that was beyond human comprehension. At the far end of the hall, a series of crystalline platforms rose in tiers, each one occupied by members of the Imperial Council. And there, on the highest platform, sat Emperor Kethari himself. Marcus had seen holographic images of the Velthari ruler, but nothing had prepared him for the Emperor's presence in person. Kethari was ancient even by Velthari standards, his skin a deep purple that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His eyes were pools of liquid silver, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. So, the Emperor said, his words echoing through the hall, "This is humanity's champion. Tell me, Captain Shun, what makes your people believe they deserve to keep worlds that rightfully belong to the Empire?" Marcus stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, but standing here in the heart of an alien empire, surrounded by beings who could end humanity with a gesture, made his prepared speeches seem inadequate. "Your Imperial Majesty," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall despite the vast space. "I come not to argue about what humanity deserves, but to speak about what all sentient beings deserve. The freedom to grow, to explore, to build something better for their children." A ripple of whispers spread through the assembled nobles. It was then that Marcus noticed her. On a platform slightly below, and to the left of the Emperor sat a figure that made Marcus forget about diplomacy, about the fate of colonies, about everything except the impossible beauty before him. Princess Zarathel was unlike any being Marcus had ever seen. Where most Velthari skin patterns were geometric and formal, hers seemed to flow like living art across her features. Her eyes were not the typical violet of her species, but a deep, luminous blue that seemed to hold the depth of ocean worlds. But it wasn't just her physical beauty that struck Marcus like a physical blow. There was something in her posture, in the way she leaned forward when he spoke, that suggested an intelligence and curiosity that transcended species. When their eyes met across the vast space of a hall, Marcus felt something shift in the universe around him. Zarathel had been prepared to be bored by the human diplomatic mission. For weeks, the court had buzzed with discussions about the upstart species that dared to challenge the Empire. Most dismissed humans as little more than clever animals, barely worthy of extermination. But as Captain Shin spoke, something in his voice, in the conviction behind his words, made her forget about Imperial protocol and lean forward in fascination. "You speak of freedom," Emperor Kethari continued, seemingly unaware of the silent exchange between his daughter and the human diplomat. "But what of order? What of the natural hierarchy that has kept peace in this galaxy for millennia? Your species has existed for barely a moment in galactic terms, yet you claim the right to hold worlds that have belonged to the Empire since before your star was born." Marcus forced himself to look away from the princess and focus on the Emperor. This was the moment that would determine humanity's fate. "Your Majesty, with respect, those worlds were empty when we found them. We've built cities, established farms, created homes for millions of people. We're not trying to take anything from the Empire. We're simply trying to exist alongside it." Exist. The word came from Zarathel herself, her voice like music made audible. "Captain Shun, your people have done more than merely exist. In 2 centuries, you've established colonies on 47 worlds, developed technologies that even our scientists find intriguing, and created art and literature that some of our scholars consider surprisingly sophisticated." The Emperor turned to his daughter with what Marcus interpreted as surprise. "Zarathel, you've been studying these humans? I believe it's important to understand those we're about to interact with, Father. Captain Shin's species may be young, but they possess qualities that deserve consideration." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. The princess was defending humanity to her own father, risking her position for a species she had never encountered before. The courage that required was staggering, especially given the power dynamics at play. "What qualities would those be, daughter?" the Emperor asked, his tone carrying a warning that wasn't lost on anyone in the hall. Zarathel rose from her seat, her movements graceful despite the obvious tension. "Resilience, innovation, and, most importantly, the ability to adapt and grow. In our ancient histories, we have records of other species that expanded too quickly, consumed too much, and ultimately destroyed themselves. Humans have faced similar challenges on their homeworld, yet they've learned to find balance. They've created art from their struggles, found beauty in their imperfections." Marcus wanted to speak, to support her argument, but something told him that this moment belonged to her. The princess was taking a stand that could have far-reaching consequences for both their peoples. "And you believe these qualities make them worthy of keeping worlds that belong to the Empire?" The Emperor's voice had grown dangerously quiet. "I believe these qualities make them worthy of partnership rather than conquest." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could feel the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon them both. He realized that Princess Zarathel had just committed what could be considered treason against her own empire, all in defense of a species she barely knew. Emperor Kethari studied his daughter for a long moment before turning his attention back to Marcus. "Captain Chun, my daughter seems to have developed strong opinions about your species. Perhaps you would be willing to spend some time at court, allowing us to better understand these remarkable qualities she speaks of." Marcus knew a trap when he heard one, but he also recognized an opportunity. "It would be my honor, Your Majesty." "Excellent. Commander Thelaner will see to your accommodations. The court will convene again in 7 days to hear your formal proposal for coexistence." The Emperor paused, his silver eyes reflecting something that might have been amusement. "I trust you will find our hospitality educational." As the assembly began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing alone in the vast hall, trying to process what had just occurred. The diplomatic mission had taken an unexpected turn, but he wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. What he did know was that Princess Zarathel had shown more courage in defending his species than most humans would have shown defending their own. As he was led from the hall by Commander Thelaner, Marcus caught one last glimpse of the princess. She was watching him leave, and when their eyes met again, she offered the slightest of nods. It was a gesture that could have meant anything, but to Marcus, it felt like a promise. The guest quarters assigned to Marcus were more luxurious than anything he had experienced in his military career. The walls were made of the same translucent crystal as the palace exterior, offering a panoramic view of the capital city. Furniture that seemed to be grown rather than built provided comfort that adjusted automatically to his human physiology. Most impressive was the communication array that allowed him to send messages back to Earth, though he suspected every word would be monitored by Imperial intelligence. Marcus composed his first report carefully, knowing that his superiors would be analyzing every detail for clues about Velthari intentions. He described the Emperor's apparent willingness to negotiate, the impressive technology on display, and the general atmosphere of the court. What he didn't mention was Princess Zarathel's unexpected support for humanity. Something told him that information was too sensitive to trust to diplomatic channels. As night fell over Velthara Prime, Marcus stood at the window watching the city's lights pulse in patterns that seemed almost musical. Somewhere in this vast palace was an alien princess who had risked everything to speak for his people. The rational part of his mind warned him that her intervention might be part of some larger political game he didn't understand. But another part of him, a part he hadn't been aware existed before today, couldn't shake the memory of those deep blue eyes and the conviction in her voice when she spoke of partnership rather than conquest. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to his quarters. Marcus activated the door controls, expecting to see Commander Thelaner or another member of his escort. Instead, he found himself face to face with Princess Zarathel herself. She had changed from her formal court attire into something simpler, though no less elegant. Her skin patterns seemed dimmer in the artificial light of his quarters, giving her an almost human appearance that was both comforting and unsettling. "Your Highness," Marcus said, offering a bow that he hoped was appropriate. "I wasn't expecting..." A personal visit from the Emperor's daughter? Zarathel stepped into his quarters with the confident grace of someone accustomed to going wherever she pleased. Neither was I, Captain Shun. But sometimes we must do unexpected things when facing unprecedented situations. Marcus gestured toward one of the strange, organic-looking chairs. Would you like to sit? Thank you. She settled into the chair with fluid grace, her eyes never leaving his face. I wanted to apologize for the difficult position my father placed you in today. The Emperor has a tendency to test those he finds interesting. Interesting? Captain Shun, in the past 50 years, no one has entered the Grand Hall and spoken to my father as an equal. Most diplomats spend their time either groveling or making threats they cannot back up. You did neither. Marcus sat across from her, trying to maintain proper diplomatic distance while fighting the urge to move closer. I simply told the truth, Your Highness. Humanity isn't looking for a war with the Empire. We just want the chance to build our own future. And what kind of future would that be? The question caught Marcus off guard. It was personal in a way he hadn't expected from this conversation. I suppose a future where people can choose their own path, where children can grow up without fear of war or oppression, where different species can work together instead of fighting over resources. Zarathel leaned forward slightly, her eyes reflecting the soft light from the windows. Your people really believe such a future is possible? We have to, Marcus replied. Without that hope, what's the point of any of this? For a long moment, they sat in silence, each studying the other across the space that separated their chairs. Marcus found himself wondering what thoughts were running through the princess's mind, what experiences had shaped her worldview, what dreams she might have for her own people's future. Captain Shun, Zarathel said finally, may I ask you something that has nothing to do with diplomacy or empires or the fate of species? Of course. What is it like to come from a world where every sunrise is unique, where weather changes without warning, where seasons shift and change the entire landscape? The question surprised him with its specificity. You've studied Earth's climate patterns? I've studied everything about your species that imperial records contain, she admitted. Your literature, your music, your scientific theories. But what I find most fascinating is your planet's unpredictability. Velthera Prime has been climate-controlled for over 8,000 years. Our weather patterns are designed for maximum efficiency and comfort. But your poets write about storms as if they were living things, about snow as if it were magic. Marcus smiled despite the strange circumstances. There's something beautiful about unpredictability, about not knowing if tomorrow will bring sunshine or rain, about having to adapt to whatever nature decides to send your way. It keeps life interesting. It sounds terrifying, Zarathel said, but her tone suggested fascination rather than fear. And wonderful. Would you like to see it someday? Earth, I mean. The words were out of Marcus's mouth before he could stop them. It was an impossible suggestion. An alien princess visiting humanity's homeworld was so far beyond the realm of diplomatic possibility that he might as well have suggested she sprout wings and fly. But Zarathel didn't laugh or look offended. Instead, she was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I think, she said finally, that it might be the most wonderful thing in the galaxy. The conversation continued deep into the night, ranging from philosophy to art to the fundamental differences between their species. Marcus found himself forgetting that he was talking to an alien princess, losing himself in the intelligence and curiosity that shone from her eyes. Zarathel seemed equally engaged, asking questions about human culture and behavior that revealed a depth of study that impressed and touched him. When she finally rose to leave, the artificial lighting in his quarters had dimmed to simulate night, and the city beyond the windows had settled into the soft, pulsing glow that the Veltheri used in place of darkness. Thank you for this conversation, Captain Shun, she said as she moved toward the door. It has been illuminating. Thank you for defending my people today, Your Highness. That took tremendous courage. She paused at the threshold, turning back to look at him one final time. Perhaps courage is another quality our species might have in common. After she left, Marcus stood at the window for hours, watching the alien city pulse with its artificial rhythms while his mind replayed every moment of their conversation. He was a soldier trained to assess threats and opportunities with clinical detachment. But Something about Princess Zarathel defied that kind of analysis. As he finally prepared for sleep in his alien quarters on an impossible world, Marcus realized that the diplomatic mission had become far more complicated than anyone could have anticipated. Somewhere in the span of a single day, the fate of humanity had become entangled with the heart of an alien princess. Whether that would prove to be salvation or destruction remained to be seen. The morning light on Velthera Prime carried a different quality than anything Marcus had experienced on Earth or the colony worlds. It seemed to emerge from the very atmosphere itself, gradually brightening from deep amber to brilliant gold without the harsh edges of a natural sunrise. As he stood on the observation deck of his quarters, watching the city come alive below, Marcus tried to process the events of the previous day. A soft chime announced an incoming message on his communication array. The holographic display materialized, showing Admiral Sarah Reyes, commander of humanity's Colonial Defense Force, and the woman who had personally selected Marcus for this mission. Captain Shun. The Admiral's voice carried clearly despite the vast distance between Velthera Prime and Earth. Your initial report was received and analyzed. Command is pleased with your progress, but we need more detailed intelligence on Veltheri military capabilities and political structure. Remember, you're not just a diplomat on this mission. Marcus nodded to the recording, though he felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had been honest in his report, but not complete. The growing complexity of his situation with Princess Zarathel seemed too delicate to trust to potentially monitored communications. Priority intelligence requirements include assessment of Imperial fleet strength, analysis of their energy weapons technology, and identification of potential fractures in their political unity. Use whatever means necessary to gather this information, Captain. Humanity's survival depends on it. The message ended, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of his dual mission. He was supposed to be negotiating for peace while simultaneously gathering intelligence for potential war. The contradiction had seemed manageable when planned on Earth, but here, after meeting Zarathel and seeing her genuine interest in peaceful coexistence, it felt like betrayal. Commander Theliner arrived precisely 1 hour after sunrise, as he had the previous day. His silver skin bore new patterns that Marcus had learned indicated formal duty status, and his violet eyes held the same mixture of curiosity and disdain that seemed common among the Veltheri. Captain Shun, Her Imperial Highness has requested your presence for a tour of our cultural heritage centers. She believes you should better understand our civilization before the formal negotiations resume. Marcus straightened his dress uniform and followed the commander through corridors that seemed to shift and flow around them. The palace architecture defied human engineering principles, with walls that curved without apparent support and spaces that seemed larger on the inside than their external dimensions suggested. Commander, Marcus said as they walked, may I ask about the patterns on your skin? They seem to change based on circumstances. Theliner glanced at him with what might have been surprise. You are observant, human. Yes, our bioluminescent patterns serve multiple functions. They indicate our emotional state, our social rank, our family lineage, and our current role or duty. It is a form of communication that your species lacks. It must make deception very difficult. For most of us, yes. Though members of the royal family learned to control their patterns from an early age. Political necessity. They emerged from the palace onto a platform that overlooked the capital city. Marcus had to grip the railing as he realized they were hundreds of meters above the ground, standing on what appeared to be a disk of solid light. Below them, the city sprawled in organic curves and spirals that followed no geometric pattern he could identify. Princess Zarathel was waiting for them, dressed in flowing robes that seemed to capture and reflect the morning light. When she turned to greet them, Marcus noticed that her skin patterns were dimmer than they had been in the throne room, creating an almost subdued effect that somehow made her more beautiful rather than less. Captain Shun, welcome to the true heart of Veltheri civilization. She gestured toward the city below. What you see from the palace is impressive, but it tells only part of our story. The platform began to move, floating down toward the city with smooth, silent motion that made Marcus grateful for the safety railings. As they descended, he could see that what had appeared to be random organic shapes from above were actually carefully planned districts, each serving specific functions within the larger urban ecosystem. Our ancestors believed that cities should grow like living things, Zarathel explained, standing close enough that he could catch the faint, ozone-like scent that seemed to accompany all Velthari. Each district evolved to meet the needs of its inhabitants, rather than conforming to rigid architectural plans. They landed in a vast plaza surrounded by structures that pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. Citizens moved through the space in patterns that seemed choreographed, though Marcus realized it was simply the natural flow of a society that had perfected urban planning over millennia. The Memory Gardens, Zarathel announced as they approached a building that appeared to be made entirely of crystallized music. Here we preserve the experiences, emotions, and knowledge of our ancestors. Not just their words or images, but the actual feelings they experienced during significant moments in our history. Inside, the building opened into a vast space filled with floating crystals that hummed with barely audible harmonies. Citizens moved between them, touching the crystals and standing motionless for minutes at a time, their expressions cycling through joy, sorrow, wonder, and other emotions that Marcus couldn't identify. Each crystal contains the preserved consciousness of someone who contributed to our civilization, Zarathel explained. Scientists, artists, philosophers, even ordinary citizens who experienced something significant. By touching them, we can feel what they felt, understand what they understood. Marcus watched a young Velthari child place her hand on a crystal and immediately begin to weep, her skin patterns shifting to display complex patterns of loss and love. Isn't that traumatic for someone so young? Growth requires understanding all aspects of existence, Zarathel replied. Joy has no meaning without sorrow. Courage has no value without fear. Your species seems to understand this intuitively. Your literature is full of tragic heroes and bittersweet victories. She led him to a smaller crystal that glowed with warm, golden light. This one might interest you. It contains the experiences of explorer Velshan, who led the first Velthari expedition beyond our home system over 12,000 years ago. Marcus hesitated. Is it safe for humans? I don't know, Zarathel admitted. You would be the first of your species to attempt contact with our memory crystals. But if you're willing, we might both learn something valuable. Commander Thelaner stepped forward, his patterns flashing warning colors. Your Highness, this could be dangerous. The human's neural structure is completely different from ours, which is exactly why it might be worthwhile. Zarathel's eyes met Marcus's. But the choice is yours, Captain. Marcus studied the crystal, feeling the weight of his mission and the complexity of his growing relationship with this alien princess. Every instinct told him to be cautious, to avoid unknown technology that could affect his mind. But another part of him, the part that had volunteered for deep space exploration and diplomatic first contact, was intensely curious. He placed his palm against the crystal surface. The experience was like nothing he could have imagined. Suddenly, he was standing on the bridge of an ancient Velthari starship, feeling the excitement and terror of a being who was about to journey farther from home than anyone in his species had ever traveled. The emotions were completely alien, yet somehow universal. The mix of fear and wonder that comes with pushing beyond known boundaries. Through Velshan's memories, Marcus experienced the first sight of an alien star system. The awe of discovering that life existed on countless worlds, the humbling realization that his people were just one small part of a vast, magnificent universe. He felt the explorer's determination to learn and understand, to build bridges between his people and the wonders they were discovering. When Marcus pulled his hand away, he found himself trembling. The experience had lasted only seconds, but it felt like he had lived through years of exploration and discovery. What did you experience? Zarathel asked, her skin patterns displaying complex swirls of curiosity and concern. Hope, Marcus said simply. He was terrified, but he was filled with hope about what they might discover, about the connections they might make with other species. Zarathel's patterns shifted to something Marcus was beginning to recognize as surprise. That's exactly what every Velthari experiences when touching that crystal. The same core emotions, despite the vast differences in your neural structure. Commander Thelaner's patterns had shifted to something that looked distinctly uncomfortable. Your Highness, we should continue with the scheduled tour. They spent the rest of the morning visiting centers of Velthari culture and learning. Marcus saw art galleries where sculptures moved and evolved over time, libraries where knowledge was stored as living concepts rather than static information, and workshops where master craftsmen created tools and decorations that seemed to blur the line between technology and magic. At each stop, Princess Zarthel explained not just what they were seeing, but the philosophy behind it. The Velthari approach to existence emphasized balance, growth, and the interconnectedness of all things. It was sophisticated beyond anything in human culture, yet Marcus found himself recognizing familiar themes in their art and literature. Your people seem to value many of the same things humans do, he observed as they watched Velthari children learning to manipulate light patterns with their hands. Growth, creativity, the desire to leave something beautiful for future generations. Perhaps that's why I find your species so fascinating, Zarthel replied. You've developed similar values through completely different evolutionary paths. It suggests that these ideals might be universal rather than unique to our culture. Or maybe, Marcus said carefully, it suggests that our species have more in common than most people believe. That afternoon, Zarthel brought Marcus to her private study within the palace. It was smaller than the grand halls they had visited, but infinitely more personal. The walls were lined with screens displaying art and information from dozens of different worlds, creating a constantly shifting tapestry of galactic culture. I want to show you something, she said, activating a display that filled one entire wall. These are the Velthari historical records of every species we've encountered over the past 10 millennia. The display showed a complex web of connections between hundreds of different species, with the Velthari Empire at the center. Lines connected them to various worlds and civilizations, some marked with symbols that Marcus interpreted as peaceful contact, others with symbols that suggested conquest or conflict. We've encountered over 300 sentient species, Zarthel continued. Some became allies, some were incorporated into the Empire, and some... She paused, her skin patterns dimming slightly. Some were eliminated when they proved incompatible with galactic stability. Marcus felt a chill despite the warm atmosphere of the study. And which category does humanity fall into? That's what we're here to determine. Zarthel touched the display, causing it to zoom in on a cluster of worlds at the edge of Imperial space. Your species has expanded faster and farther than any other we've encountered. In 2 centuries, you've claimed more territory than civilizations typically manage in 2 millennia. This has created concern among the Imperial Council. Concern about what, specifically? About whether humans can be trusted to respect the boundaries that have maintained galactic peace for thousands of years. About whether your rapid expansion indicates aggressive intent toward the Empire itself. Marcus studied the display, trying to understand the patterns and connections it represented. What would it take to convince the Council that humanity wants cooperation, not conflict? Zarthel was quiet for a long moment, her patterns shifting through colors he couldn't interpret. Honestly, I'm not sure it's possible. The Council has seen too many species promise peace while preparing for war. They've learned to respond to potential threats before those threats become actual ones. And what do you think? She turned to face him fully, her blue eyes intense in the shifting light of the displays. I think that in all our records of 300 species, none of them ever sent a diplomat who was willing to touch a memory crystal from our most sacred cultural site. None of them ever looked at our art and recognized the same themes from their own culture. None of them ever asked me what I thought about their people's future rather than simply demanding what they wanted. The weight of her words settled between them like a bridge spanning the impossible distance between their species. Marcus realized that somewhere in the past 2 days, this had stopped being just a diplomatic mission. It had become personal in ways that could either save both their peoples or doom them entirely. Zarthel, he said, using her name without the formal title for the first time. What happens if the Council decides that humanity is too dangerous to be allowed to continue expanding? Her skin patterns dimmed to almost nothing, a display of emotion that he was beginning to understand meant deep sorrow or fear. Then, the Imperial fleet will be dispatched to your colonies. Not to conquer them, but to sterilize them. Every human settlement beyond your home system will be eliminated, and Earth itself will be quarantined to prevent your species from ever traveling to the stars again. The casual way she spoke of genocide made Marcus's blood run cold, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was intelligence that could save his people, even if hearing it felt like a physical blow. How long do we have? The council meets in 5 days to hear your formal proposal. If they're not convinced that humanity can be trusted, she left the sentence unfinished. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out over the alien city with its impossible architecture and its citizens who could casually contemplate the extinction of entire species. And you? What will you argue when the council meets? That your species represents something new in the galaxy, something worth preserving and learning from rather than eliminating, even if it means opposing your own father. Zarathel joined him at the window, standing close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her alien physiology. Captain Shun, Marcus, in the past 2 days, you've shown me aspects of existence that I never knew were possible. The idea of embracing uncertainty rather than controlling it, of finding beauty in imperfection, of choosing hope over fear even when the odds seem impossible. She paused, her reflection ghost-like in the transparent wall. My father rules through strength and certainty. He's maintained peace for over 1,000 years by eliminating threats before they could grow dangerous. It's an effective strategy, but it's also limited. And you think humanity offers something different? I think humanity offers growth, change, the possibility that the galaxy could become something more than it is now, rather than simply maintaining what has always been. Marcus turned to look at her, this alien princess who was risking everything to defend a species she barely knew. Why are you doing this? Really? Zarathel's skin patterns shifted to something he hadn't seen before, complex swirls of color that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Because for the first time in my life, I met someone who makes me believe that tomorrow could be better than today. And that's not a feeling I'm willing to let the galaxy lose. The rest of the afternoon passed in deeper conversation as Zarathel shared more details about Velthari society and Marcus offered insights into human culture and history. They discussed art and philosophy, the challenges of governing diverse populations, and the fundamental question of whether different species could truly coexist without one eventually dominating the others. As evening approached, casting the study in the soft, artificial twilight that Velthari used in place of natural darkness, Marcus realized that he was facing an impossible choice. His mission required him to gather intelligence that could help humanity survive if diplomacy failed. But doing so would mean betraying the trust of someone who was risking everything to help his people. Zarathel, he said finally, I need to tell you something about my mission here. She looked up from a display she had been adjusting, her patterns shifting to show attention and mild concern. What is it? Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say could change everything between them. But if he was asking her to risk her position and her relationship with her father for humanity's sake, she deserved to know the full truth about why he was here. I'm not just a diplomat, he began. I'm also here to gather intelligence about Velthari military capabilities and political vulnerabilities. Information that could be used against your people if peaceful negotiations fail. Zarathel went very still, her skin patterns fading to almost nothing. For a long moment, the only sound in the study was the soft humming of the various displays and the distant sounds of the city beyond the windows. I see, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. And have you gathered such information? Some, Marcus admitted, though not intentionally. Things you've told me about the Imperial fleet, about how the Council makes decisions, about the political dynamics within your government. And will you report this information to your superiors? Marcus met her eyes, knowing that his answer would determine not just his relationship with her, but potentially the fate of both their species. I don't know. My orders are clear, but my conscience is complicated. Zarathel studied his face for a long moment, her patterns still dim but beginning to show faint traces of what he hoped was understanding rather than anger. Marcus, may I ask you something? Of course. If our positions were reversed, if I were visiting Earth as a diplomat while secretly gathering intelligence about human military capabilities, what would you do? It was a fair question, and Marcus gave it the consideration it deserved. I suppose it would depend on whether I believe your intentions were ultimately peaceful or hostile. And what do you believe about my intentions? I believe, Marcus said slowly, that you genuinely want to find a peaceful solution that allows both our peoples to thrive, even if it means challenging your own government's policies. Zarathel's patterns brightened slightly, showing what he was learning to recognize as relief. Then, perhaps we both understand that sometimes our loyalty to higher principles must outweigh our loyalty to the organizations we serve. It was a profound statement, and Marcus realized that she was offering him a way to navigate the impossible contradictions of his mission. He could serve humanity's interests while still honoring the growing bond between them, as long as he remained focused on the ultimate goal of peace rather than the intermediate goal of gathering intelligence for war. As the artificial night settled over Velthera Prime, Marcus and Zarathel continued their conversation, but the dynamic between them had shifted. They were no longer just a human diplomat and an alien princess trying to bridge the gap between their species. They were two individuals who had found common ground despite impossible circumstances, and who were now committed to finding a solution that could preserve both their peoples and the unexpected connection they had discovered. The challenge that lay ahead was enormous. In 3 days, Marcus would have to present a proposal to the Imperial Council that could convince them to abandon thousands of years of policy toward expanding species. And Zarathel would have to find a way to support that proposal without destroying her relationship with her father or her position within the Empire. But as they talked deep into the artificial night, both of them began to believe that it might be possible. Not because the task was easy, but because they had found something worth fighting for that transcended the boundaries of species and empire. The third day of Marcus's stay on Velthera Prime began with an unexpected summons. Instead of Commander Thelaner arriving for the morning escort, a different Velthari appeared at his quarters, one whose skin patterns immediately marked him as military rather than diplomatic staff. Captain Chun, the officer said, his voice carrying the clipped precision of soldiers across species barriers. I am General Kothvar, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Defense Forces. His Imperial Majesty has requested that you accompany me for a demonstration of Velthari military capabilities. Marcus felt his heart rate spike, though he kept his expression neutral. After his conversation with Zarathel the previous evening about the moral complexities of intelligence gathering, being directly offered military information felt like a test. It will be my honor, General. The General's patterns shifted to what Marcus was beginning to recognize as approval. Good. Your species has a reputation for military pragmatism. It will be interesting to see how accurate that assessment is. They traveled from the palace in a vehicle that seemed to flow rather than roll, moving through the city at speeds that should have been uncomfortable but felt perfectly smooth. Marcus noticed that other vehicles automatically moved aside, clearing a path without any apparent communication or traffic control system. General, Marcus said, deciding to take advantage of the opportunity for conversation, may I ask about Velthari military doctrine? From what I've observed, your people seem to prefer technological solutions to most problems. An astute observation, Kothvar replied, his pattern showing what might have been professional interest. Your species tends toward direct confrontation, what you call brute force solutions. We have found that superior technology, properly applied, can achieve victory without the massive casualties that characterize human warfare. They were approaching what appeared to be a vast complex on the outskirts of the city. Unlike the organic, flowing architecture of the civilian areas, the military installation was all sharp angles and crystalline surfaces that seemed designed to deflect energy rather than absorb it. The Imperial War Academy, General Kothvar explained as they passed through security barriers that scanned them with beams of light Marcus couldn't identify. Every Velthari military officer trains here, learning not just tactics and strategy, but the philosophical principles that guide our approach to conflict. The first demonstration took place in what the general called the tactical simulation chamber. Marcus found himself standing in what appeared to be empty space, surrounded by a perfect three-dimensional recreation of a star system. Ships moved through the void around them, some clearly Velthari in design, others representing various alien species. This is the Battle of Kepler 442, the general explained as the simulation began to play out. fought 200 years ago against a species called the Thrakkery, who were attempting to establish a foothold in Imperial space. Marcus watched in fascination and growing concern as the Velthari fleet engaged the enemy ships. The Thrakkery vessels were massive, clearly designed for heavy combat, but they moved slowly and seemed to rely on overwhelming firepower rather than tactical sophistication. The Velthari ships were smaller, faster, and utterly devastating. They moved in patterns that seemed almost like a dance, coordinating their attacks with precision that suggested either perfect communication or some form of shared consciousness. Their weapons didn't fire traditional projectiles or energy beams, but rather seemed to disrupt the fundamental structure of matter itself. Phase disruption technology, the general explained, noting Marcus's expression. Rather than overwhelming enemy shields or armor, we simply convinced the atoms in their hulls to stop maintaining cohesion. Very efficient, very clean. The battle was over in minutes. The massive Thrakkery fleet simply dissolved, their ships breaking apart at the molecular level without explosions or debris. It was the most terrifying display of military power Marcus had ever witnessed, made worse by its clinical efficiency. The Thrakkery were a proud species, General Kothvar continued as the simulation faded. They had conquered dozens of worlds, built an empire that spanned 3-star systems. They believed their superior numbers and firepower would be sufficient against us. What happened to them? They no longer exist as a spacefaring civilization. After this battle, we offered them the choice of integration into the Empire or limitation to their homeworld. They chose integration. Marcus forced himself to ask the question that his mission required, even though he dreaded the answer. And if they had chosen limitation, the general's patterns shifted to something that was definitely amusement. Captain Chun, your species has been studying our historical records, haven't you? You already know the answer to that question. They moved to another demonstration area, where Marcus was shown the latest developments in Velthari military technology. Weapons that could disrupt electronic systems across entire star systems, defensive shields that could render entire planets invisible to outside detection, and, most disturbing of all, automated ships that could pursue and eliminate targets without any biological crew to worry about casualties or moral qualms. Impressive, Marcus said, though the word felt inadequate to describe what he was seeing. Your technology is certainly advanced beyond anything humanity has developed. Yes, the general agreed. Which raises an interesting question about your species' rapid expansion. How have you managed to claim and hold so many worlds without technology that could match even our reserve forces? It was clearly a test, and Marcus realized that his answer could provide information about human military capabilities that might be used against his people. But refusing to answer would be equally revealing. Determination, Marcus said finally, and the willingness to accept casualties that other species might consider unacceptable. General Kothvar's patterns showed surprise and what might have been respect. Explain. Most of the worlds we've settled were considered too dangerous or too difficult for other species to claim. Planets with hostile environments, systems with unstable stars, regions of space where navigation is nearly impossible. We've lost entire colonies to natural disasters, hostile alien life forms, and cosmic phenomena that we didn't understand. But we kept going, and this appeals to your people. Marcus thought about the human colonists he'd met during his military service. Families who had traveled for months or years to reach worlds that might kill them. Scientists who spent their lives studying phenomena that could wipe out entire research stations. Soldiers who volunteered for missions they knew they might not survive. I think it's less about appeal and more about hope, he said. Every human settlement that succeeds proves that our species can adapt and grow. Every failure teaches us something we need to know for the next attempt. We don't expand because it's easy. We expand because it's necessary. The general studied him with those unsettling violet eyes. Necessary for what? For becoming more than we were. For proving to ourselves that we can be worthy of the stars. They spent the rest of the morning touring various aspects of the military academy. Marcus saw training facilities where Velthari officers learned to coordinate fleets across interstellar distances, research laboratories where new weapons were developed and tested, and planning centers where potential conflicts were analyzed and strategies developed. At each stop, General Kothvar provided detailed explanations of Velthari military capabilities and doctrine. The information was far more comprehensive than anything Marcus could have hoped to gather through covert intelligence operations. It was also clearly being offered for a purpose. General, Marcus said as they toured a facility where new officer candidates were learning advanced tactical theory. May I ask why you're sharing all of this with me? This information would be invaluable to any species planning military action against the Empire. An excellent question, the general replied, his patterns showing approval. Tell me, Captain, what is your assessment of humanity's chances in a military conflict with the Velthari Empire? Marcus had been dreading this moment, but he owed both his species and his host an honest answer. Based on what I've seen today, I would estimate our chances at approximately 0. 0. General, your technology is centuries ahead of ours. Your tactical coordination is beyond anything we could hope to match. And your industrial capacity could replace losses faster than we could inflict them. In a direct military confrontation, humanity would be extinct within a year. The general's patterns brightened considerably. That, Captain Shun, is exactly the assessment we hoped you would reach. The purpose of this demonstration was not to provide you with intelligence about our capabilities. It was to ensure you understood the futility of military resistance to imperial authority. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the trap he had just walked into. I see. Do you? The Imperial Council is currently debating whether to offer your species the same choice we gave the Thrakkeray, integration or limitation. Your assessment of relative military capabilities will be a crucial factor in that decision. They were walking through a final demonstration area where advanced combat simulations were being tested. The scenarios being run all involved conflicts with species that use technology similar to humanity's current level. In every case, the alien forces were overwhelmed quickly and completely. However, the general continued, there is a third option that the Council has not yet considered. One that Princess Zarathel has been advocating in private discussions with various council members. Marcus's attention sharpened. What option is that? Partnership. Voluntary cooperation rather than forced integration or imposed limitation. Your species would continue to govern your own worlds, but under the umbrella of imperial protection and with access to Velthari technology and trade networks. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What would the Empire gain from such an arrangement? General Kothvar stopped walking and turned to face Marcus directly. Captain, in 10,000 years of expansion and conquest, the Velthari Empire has achieved stability, prosperity, and technological advancement beyond anything the galaxy has ever seen. But we have also become static. Our art, our science, our culture, they have reached a level of perfection that leaves little room for growth or change. And you think humanity could provide that growth? I think your species represents something the galaxy has never seen before. You adapt to impossible circumstances. You find solutions where none should exist, and you persist in the face of overwhelming odds. These are qualities that could benefit the Empire, if properly channeled. Marcus realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented. The conversation had moved beyond military demonstration to what amounted to a recruitment pitch. The Velthari weren't just considering whether to destroy humanity. They were considering whether to embrace them as partners. What would Princess Zarathel's proposal require from humanity? Recognition of imperial authority in matters of interstellar law and conflict resolution. Acceptance of technological and cultural exchange programs. And, most importantly, a commitment to work within existing galactic structures rather than attempting to create parallel systems. And in return, access to technology that would advance your civilization by centuries. Trade relationships that would ensure prosperity for every human world, and protection from the other hostile species that your rapid expansion has undoubtedly attracted attention from. It was an extraordinary offer, but Marcus could sense there were complications he wasn't seeing. General, may I ask why you're discussing this with me, rather than saving it for the formal negotiations? The general's patterns shifted to something Marcus couldn't interpret. Because the princess has convinced several council members that your species possesses qualities worth preserving. But there are others who remain unconvinced. Your presentation to the Council in 2 days will need to address their specific concerns about human reliability and long-term intentions. What concerns specifically? That humans are fundamentally aggressive and will eventually challenge imperial authority once you've gained access to advanced technology. That your rapid expansion indicates territorial ambitions that could threaten existing galactic boundaries. And, most seriously, that your species lacks the cultural maturity to be trusted with the kind of power that partnership with the Empire would provide. Marcus absorbed this information, understanding that he was being given advance warning about the arguments he would need to counter. It was valuable intelligence, but it also suggested that there were Velthari, including possibly General Kothvar himself, who were hoping he would succeed. And what does Princess Zarathel believe about these concerns? The princess believes that your species' greatest strength is also the answer to the Council's greatest fear, that humans' adaptability and persistence, properly guided by imperial wisdom, could benefit the galaxy rather than threaten it. They had reached the end of the tour, standing on an observation deck that overlooked the vast military complex. Thousands of Velthari personnel moved through the facility below, maintaining and developing the military power that had kept the Empire dominant for millennia. Captain Chun, the general said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, I have one final demonstration for you. The observation deck's transparent walls suddenly displayed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of star systems were marked in various colors, showing the extent of Velthari territory and the locations of other major powers. The red markers indicate systems claimed by humanity, the general explained. As you can see, your expansion has brought you into contact with 3 other major powers, none of which have the Empire's restraint regarding younger species. Marcus studied the display with growing alarm. Human settlements were scattered throughout regions that bordered territories controlled by species he didn't recognize. In several cases, human colonies appeared to be isolated far from any possibility of support from Earth or the other core worlds. The Zephyrians have already filed complaints with the Imperial Council about human encroachment into regions they consider their sphere of influence, the general continued. The Nethrak Collective has begun mobilizing their fleets in response to your settlement of the Kepler 438 system, and the Void Hunters have marked several of your outer colonies as potential targets for their next expansion cycle. Are you saying that humanity needs Imperial protection to survive? I'm saying that your species has been remarkably successful at claiming territory, but success in expansion and success in holding that territory against determined opponents are very different challenges. The implications were staggering. Marcus realized that humanity's rapid expansion, which they had seen as proof of their species' strength and adaptability, had actually placed them in an incredibly vulnerable position. Without allies or advanced technology, human settlements were isolated targets for any hostile species looking to expand their own territory. How long do we have before these threats become active military problems? Intelligence suggests that formal military action against human colonies could begin within the next year, regardless of the Empire's decision about your species' future. The difference is whether you face those challenges alone or as part of the galactic community. Marcus understood now why Princess Zarathel's partnership proposal represented more than just an opportunity. It was humanity's only realistic chance for survival. The choice wasn't between independence and subjugation, but between partnership and extinction. General Kothvar, Marcus said, I need to ask you a direct question, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer. Proceed. Do you personally support Princess Zarathel's proposal for partnership rather than integration or limitation? The general's patterns showed complex, shifting colors that Marcus was still learning to interpret. Captain, I am a soldier. I have spent my entire career maintaining the Empire's security through superior force and strategic intimidation. It is an effective system that has brought peace to the galaxy for millennia. He paused, watching the display of galactic territories with the eye of someone who had spent centuries planning their defense. But I'm also old enough to remember when the Empire was growing and expanding, when we faced challenges that required innovation and adaptation rather than simply applying overwhelming force to static problems. Your species reminds me of what we once were before we became satisfied with perfection. And You think that's valuable enough to risk changing a system that has worked for thousands of years? I think, the general said carefully, that a system that stops growing eventually starts dying, even if it takes millennia for the decay to become apparent. The question is whether partnership with humanity would provide the stimulus for renewed growth or simply introduce chaos that undermines everything we've built. As they prepared to return to the palace, Marcus realized that his mission had evolved far beyond its original parameters. He was no longer just gathering intelligence or negotiating for humanity's survival. He had become part of a larger debate within Velthari society about their own future direction. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but it also provided clarity about what he needed to accomplish in his presentation to the Imperial Council. He needed to convince them not just that humanity deserved to survive, but that partnership with his species could provide benefits that outweighed the risks. And he needed to do it in a way that honored both his own people's values and the growing bond he had formed with Princess Zarathel, who was risking everything to advocate for a future neither of their species had ever imagined. The fourth day on Velthara Prime began with an unprecedented breach of protocol. Marcus woke to find Princess Zarathel waiting in his quarters common area, her skin patterns dim with what he had learned to recognize as distress. She was wearing simple traveling clothes instead of her formal court attire, and her usual composed demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled urgency. "Marcus," she said as soon as he emerged from the sleeping chamber, "we need to leave the palace immediately. There have been developments." "What kind of developments?" "The kind that could see us both charged with treason if we're discovered," she replied grimly. "Please, gather only what you need. We have very little time." Marcus had learned enough about Velthari culture to recognize that Princess Zarathel's presence in his quarters without an official escort represented a massive violation of Imperial protocol. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough for her to risk her position and possibly her life. "Where are we going?" "To meet someone who can provide information crucial to your presentation tomorrow. But first, we need to get out of the palace without being detected by Imperial security." She led him through corridors he hadn't seen before, passages that seemed designed for service staff rather than royal family members. Her knowledge of the palace's hidden routes suggested this wasn't the first time she had needed to move unseen through her own home. They emerged into what appeared to be a maintenance area, where a vehicle unlike any Marcus had seen waited for them. Instead of the flowing, organic design common to Velthari technology, this craft was angular and functional, clearly built for stealth rather than comfort. "This belongs to Lord Veltorin," Zarathel explained as they climbed aboard. "He's one of the few council members who supports the partnership proposal, but he couldn't risk being seen meeting with you officially." The vehicle lifted off silently and headed away from the palace complex. As they flew, Marcus noticed that they were taking a circuitous route that avoided the main traffic patterns he had observed during his previous tours of the city. "Zarathel," Marcus said, using her personal name deliberately, "what exactly are we walking into? And what are the risks for you if we're caught?" Her patterns shifted to something he hadn't seen before, complex swirls that seemed to indicate a mixture of determination and resignation. "Yesterday, after your tour with General Kothvar, emergency intelligence briefings were distributed to all council members. Someone has been feeding information about our defensive capabilities to hostile species on our borders." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Do they suspect me?" "Not specifically, but there are council members who see the timing of your arrival and these intelligence leaks as more than coincidental. They're pushing for an immediate vote to classify humanity as a hostile species and authorize preemptive military action. And Lord Veltorin can help us how? He has evidence that the intelligence leaks began months before your arrival. Evidence that points to the real source of the security breach. But he can't present it officially without revealing his own intelligence networks, which would compromise ongoing operations throughout the Empire. They were flying over a part of the city Marcus hadn't seen before, where the buildings were older and less uniform in design. This appeared to be a historical district where ancient Velthari architecture had been preserved alongside more modern developments. "So we're conducting an unofficial meeting to gather unofficial intelligence to support an unofficial proposal for partnership with a species that may be officially classified as hostile within the next 24 hours. That's a remarkably concise summary of our situation, Zarathel replied with what might have been humor under less dire circumstances. They landed at what appeared to be a private residence built in the classical Velthari style. The building's organic curves and softly glowing surfaces created an atmosphere of ancient dignity, though Marcus noticed defensive systems that were anything but ancient. Lord Veltorin met them at the entrance, and Marcus immediately understood why this meeting couldn't be conducted through official channels. The elderly Velthari's skin patterns marked him as a member of one of the Empire's most ancient noble families, but they also showed signs of genetic modification that indicated involvement with Imperial intelligence services. Captain Chun, Lord Veltorin said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of old Velthari court language. Her Highness has spoken extensively about your species' potential value to the Empire. I hope you understand the risks we are all taking by meeting like this. I do, my lord, and I'm honored that you're willing to take those risks on humanity's behalf. Don't mistake my motives, Captain. I'm not doing this for humanity's sake, but for the Empire's. Your species has inadvertently uncovered a conspiracy that threatens the stability of our government, and I need your help to expose it. Lord Veltorin led them into a study that was lined with what appeared to be ancient Velthari artifacts. Charts and displays covered every available surface, showing intelligence reports, communication intercepts, and analysis that clearly came from sources throughout the Imperial government. For the past 6 months, Lord Veltorin began, someone within the Imperial hierarchy has been providing detailed information about our military capabilities, defensive positions, and strategic planning to several hostile species on our borders. The information is too detailed and too current to be coming from any external intelligence operation. He activated a display that showed communication patterns between various Imperial facilities and external receivers. The complexity of the data suggested surveillance operations that had been ongoing for months or even years. At first, we assumed this was standard espionage, the kind of intelligence gathering that all major powers engage in. But the scope and detail of the information being leaked suggests someone with access to the highest levels of Imperial security. Marcus studied the displays, his military intelligence training helping him recognize patterns in the data. You're talking about someone on the Imperial Council itself, or someone very close to them, Lord Veltorin confirmed. The timing of these leaks has been coordinated to coincide with your diplomatic mission. Someone wants to ensure that any consideration of partnership with humanity is overshadowed by concerns about security breaches and hostile species activities. Princess Zarathel moved to another display that showed recent military movements by the species General Kathvar had mentioned the previous day. The Zephyrians, the Nethrak Collective, and the Void Hunters have all significantly increased their military preparations in the past month. Someone has been providing them with information about Imperial response capabilities and encouraging them to view human expansion as an opportunity for their own territorial gains. So humanity is being set up as both a scapegoat for the security leaks and a catalyst for conflicts that could destabilize the entire region. Precisely, Lord Veltorin replied. Whoever is behind this benefits from a scenario where the Empire is forced to take aggressive action against your species while simultaneously dealing with multiple hostile threats on our borders. Marcus was beginning to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. And if the Empire is destabilized by multiple conflicts, that creates opportunities for internal political changes, Princess Zarathel finished. There are factions within the government that believe the Empire has become too cautious, too focused on maintaining stability rather than expanding our territory and influence. Lord Veltorin activated another display that showed political alignments within the Imperial Council. Council member Drakthal has been the most vocal opponent of any accommodation with humanity. He argues that your species represents an existential threat to Imperial security and should be eliminated immediately. And you believe he's involved in the intelligence leaks? I believe he's either directly involved or being manipulated by whoever is, Lord Veltorin replied carefully. Drakthal commands significant influence among the military-focused council members, and he has access to all the intelligence that's been compromised. Princess Zarathel moved to a display that showed detailed analysis of the leaked information. The pattern of what's been shared is very specific. Nothing about internal imperial politics or economic structures, but everything about military capabilities, defensive positions, and strategic planning. It's exactly the information that hostile species would need to coordinate attacks against both imperial territory and human colonies. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. So the goal is to create a situation where the Empire is forced to fight multiple conflicts simultaneously, weakening our position and creating opportunities for political change within the imperial government, while also ensuring that humanity is eliminated as a potential ally or source of innovation that might strengthen the current imperial system, Lord Veltorin added. What evidence do you have that proves Drakthal's involvement? Lord Veltorin hesitated, his patterns showing complex emotions that Marcus couldn't interpret. That's where the situation becomes complicated. The evidence exists, but obtaining it required surveillance methods that the Council would consider illegal if conducted without their explicit authorization. Unauthorized surveillance of Council member Drakthal's private communications, his travel patterns, and his connections with individuals outside the official imperial hierarchy, Princess Zarathel explained. Evidence that could prove his guilt, but only by admitting to activities that would result in Lord Veltorin's exile or execution. Marcus understood now why this meeting was necessary and why it had to be conducted in secret. They had evidence that could save humanity and expose a conspiracy against the Empire, but using that evidence would destroy the person who had gathered it. Is there any way to present this information without revealing its source? Possibly, Lord Veltorin replied. If someone else were to independently discover evidence of Drakthal's activities and present it to the Council, someone whose presence on Velthara Prime could be explained by legitimate diplomatic activities. You want me to accuse a member of the Imperial Council of treason based on evidence I can't officially know exists? I want you to save your species and mine from a conspiracy that threatens both, Lord Veltorin said bluntly. The evidence exists, and it's conclusive. The challenge is finding a way to present it that doesn't destroy everyone involved in uncovering it. They spent the next several hours reviewing the evidence in detail. The case against Council member Drakthal was indeed compelling. Communication records showing contact with hostile species, travel records placing him in locations where intelligence leaks had originated, and financial transactions that suggested compensation for providing classified information. But Marcus also understood the impossible position he was being placed in. His presentation to the Imperial Council was supposed to focus on humanity's potential value as a partner. Now he was being asked to expose a conspiracy that could tear the Imperial government apart. There's something else, Princess Zarathel said as they prepared to leave Lord Veltorin's residence. Drakthal has requested the right to question you directly during tomorrow's council session. He's claiming that your presence represents a security risk that requires immediate investigation. What kind of questioning? The kind that could be used to justify any conclusion he wants to reach, Lord Veltorin replied grimly. Drakthal is skilled at political theater. He could easily manipulate your responses to make you appear evasive or hostile, regardless of what you actually say. As they flew back toward the palace, Marcus realized that his presentation to the Imperial Council had become far more complex than anyone could have anticipated. He wasn't just arguing for humanity's survival. He was walking into the middle of a conspiracy that threatened the stability of the galaxy's most powerful empire. Zarathel, he said as the palace came into view, what happens if I expose Drakthal's conspiracy, but the Council doesn't believe the evidence? What happens if they see this as a desperate attempt to deflect attention from humanity's supposed guilt? Her patterns dimmed with what he recognized as deep concern. Then, both our species will be destroyed by the conflicts that Drakthal's conspiracy has already set in motion. The hostile species on our borders won't stop their military preparations just because the conspiracy is exposed. They've already committed resources and reputation to the idea of territorial expansion at the Empire's expense. And if I don't expose the conspiracy, then humanity will be classified as a hostile species, and the Imperial fleet will be dispatched to eliminate your colonies within the week. Meanwhile, the Empire will face coordinated attacks from multiple directions while believing that the intelligence leaks have stopped with humanity's elimination. Marcus understood that he was facing a choice with no good options. But as they landed at the palace and prepared to return to their separate quarters, he also understood something else. The bond that had formed between him and Princess Zarathel had evolved beyond personal attraction or diplomatic convenience. They had become genuine allies, committed to protecting both their peoples, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. "Tomorrow, when I address the council," Marcus said as they prepared to part, "I'm going to need you to trust me completely. What I'm planning to say may seem like betrayal or insanity, but it's the only way I can see to save both our peoples and expose the conspiracy." Princess Zarathel's patterns brightened with what he had learned to recognize as determination mixed with affection. "Marcus, I've already trusted you with my life, my position, and my species' future. Tomorrow, I'll trust you with whatever plan you've developed, no matter how impossible it seems." As Marcus returned to his quarters, he spent the remaining hours before dawn crafting a presentation that would either save two civilizations or destroy them both. The challenge was finding a way to expose Drakthal's conspiracy while simultaneously proving humanity's value as a partner rather than a threat. The solution he developed was audacious, dangerous, and depended on timing and psychology as much as evidence. But it was also the only approach he could conceive that addressed all the political realities they were facing. Tomorrow, in the Grand Hall where his mission had begun, Marcus would make the most important speech in human history. And Princess Zarathel would have to trust that a human soldier's understanding of courage and sacrifice could somehow bridge the gap between love and duty, between species and empire, between the future both their peoples needed and the destruction that threatened to consume them all. The Grand Hall of the Velthari Empire had never witnessed a gathering quite like the one assembled for Captain Marcus Chen's formal presentation. Every member of the Imperial Council was present, their skin patterns creating a complex tapestry of political alignments and emotional states that would have been impossible for any human diplomat to fully interpret. Representatives from major imperial military commands, scientific institutions, and cultural organizations filled the observer galleries, while security forces maintained positions throughout the vast space. Emperor